Hello listeners, and welcome to a January bonus episode. I wanted to bring this episode to you all at the start of the year because it is an episode that focuses on how certain organisations may prey on vulnerable people who are looking to work on themselves physically and emotionally in the new year. How some people may pose as members of wellness groups that exist to benefit you and not to exploit you. Please listen to this episode with caution because it comes with themes of human trafficking for the purposes of sex, forced pregnancy terminations, sexual and emotional abuse, and stalking. This episode is extremely prevalent during January's Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery Awareness Month, but also as the recent verdict came in for Ghislaine Maxwell, a person who assisted Jeffrey Epstein into grooming children for the purpose of sex trafficking for Epstein and his followers. Sarah has decided to remain anonymous, an important decision as she has finally managed to escape this group and move to a place where they are yet to find her. But if anybody wishes to ask Sarah any questions after this episode, then I will be sure to forward them on. So just email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to ask her. As I mentioned, please listen with caution, and before we get started, don't forget you can get 10% off CrimeCon tickets by using the word cult in the checkout. You can nominate loved ones for the Cult Vault Ally Awards by entering on my website. And you can be in with a chance of winning copies of Zach Bonnie's books, Dead, Insane or in Jail, and his second book Overwritten by following, liking and commenting on my social media at cultvaultpod on Twitter and Instagram. I'll place all the links in the episode description. And I'll also include a link for a safe place for women to discuss abortion without judgment or persecution, and some supportive sources for abortion-related trauma, starting with Abortion Talk, who are destigmatizing abortion one conversation at a time. But for now, here is Sarah. So hello, Sarah, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here today and for sharing your story with us. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Thank you very much, Casey, for having me. I'm Sarah. I am half Swiss, half German, and I'm currently still studying. And I don't want to say more because I appreciate staying quite anonymous on this year. So that's it from now.
And I think everybody listening will completely understand and respect that decision. And today we're going to be discussing the rise of certain groups that often disguise themselves as wellness or self-empowerment therapy groups, but are actually preying on vulnerable people. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So I've made such experience when I was 22. And currently living in London in 2016. And I was actually groomed into one by an alumni friend or an alumni person I have met from my old boarding school. And it all seemed very, very harmless in the beginning. But I will tell you more about it, how it slowly became quite dangerous.
Can you give us a brief history of this particular group that you were brought into?
Yeah, so basically I met the woman, I can tell her name. Her name is Marella. And I met her at an alumni meetup just a couple of weeks in when I've been living in London. And she basically told me that she's currently working on her own startup, which is sort of an online platform which helps with meditation, self-improvement, and some sort of basically women's empowerment. And she told me that this group was originally founded by a friend she knows. She didn't tell me the name or anything. She just said that this friend is living in London and she has known him for the past 25 years. And basically he's sort of coordinating this startup with her. And back then I was really not interested in anything of that. So I was a fashion student, textiles, and I was really on a different track. I did some yoga, but I was never really interested in anything of the spiritual world it was nice to hear and it was interesting, but then she offered an internship opportunity. So this was in, I think, June when I met her. And I had my first year done in February. So in February, then I came back to her and I asked her, listen, can you help me find an internship in fashion because it's quite difficult? And she said, yeah, of course. So she became like super friendly and open towards me. And this is sort of the first thing how they get you. They are really inviting and they really show their own vulnerability to you. So you as well, like you're very open and you're just very, let's say, trusting, and looking backwards, of course, naive. But still, I just thought, okay, we went to the same boarding school. There was already a certain like trust foundation. So I got invited several times to her home. I met her son, her husband. So she basically became like a second family to me within a very short time, weeks, basically. And so I opened up already to her about some issues I was having at that time with my boyfriend or with friends, or just normal stuff. But it was all already within weeks that you became really, really close to that person. And so it slowly started that she invited me to basically have an internship. And when this suddenly fell through with a designer, she then told me that, oh, it's not an issue. I can give you basically a 1-month trial on my startup platform. And within that month, I will find you another internship for sure. And that's how I basically was led into that, by still believing that I will have an internship in fashion in a couple of weeks. And this never happened. So I just stayed on her platform and tried the free, or it wasn't free. I was asked to pay already for the first month, but it was sort of a payment where I saw like a friendship payment, where I thought, okay, she will help me with the internship and I will pay the 1-month trial. So we're kind of equal. Yeah.
So you've met this woman, Marella, who you have attended. You've both attended the same boarding school at different times. So you have never met her before. You have this.
Yeah, she's 20 years older than I am.
Okay, so you meet this Marella woman. She's very open. She's vulnerable with you. She tells you personal things, and you think, wow, she must be a really genuine person, because she's telling me all of these things that are so personal, and she doesn't know me very well, so she must trust me. And then so in return, you're open and vulnerable with her, and you get to know her family, and you get very close to her very quickly. And she says that she can set you up with this fashion internship, but then that first initial internship falls through. Did you ever have any evidence that existed?
Like when in the first few meetings, when I was at her home, she basically gave me a list. I still have that with numbers. And the designer I was supposed to have it with was Giovanni Bedin. He has a small atelier, and it was supposed to be in Bologna. So at that time, I was actually studying Italian, because I was like super into it. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Italy. I'm going to work for his company. So it was super safe. And when I met him, I think a week before the internship was supposed to start, I met him in London, and he was not even like, we were sitting opposite to each other, and he was not even looking at me anymore. He was just scrolling for flights on his phone. And basically within 10 minutes, he just told me that he cannot employ me, and that's it. And this was a week before. And I remember that day, like I called Marella and I asked her what this is and if she knows why he's reacting in that way. And she invited me to her home, and this was very awkward. And then suddenly she was like, yeah, Sarah, we will find something. And then she was like, oh, by the way, I want to give you a dress. And she basically gifted me a 2,000 pound Lanvin dress. And she was like, oh, I just have that here. And the price tag was still on. So this was already kind of like strange. But I still thought, okay, this poor woman is feeling so guilty because Giovanni is supposed to be her friend, and he just lets me down like a week before I was supposed to move to Italy. So still, I think this is something which like all humans do. They try to like justify like even very strange actions if you trust a person. So for me, there was just this trust foundation. And I was like, okay, maybe I would have done the same, or I don't know. So I just thought this is her way of apologizing. And then I was telling her that now I don't have an apartment in London anymore from the next week, and I have to move back to Munich alone. So, and then I was already telling her back then that I didn't have like a broad network in Munich anymore and that I don't know what I should do the next month. So that's when she jumped in and she was like, listen, just start a trial right now, the next couple of days. And for the first month, you will be fine. So that's how I got into that.
The reason I asked the question originally about whether you had any evidence of the original internship ever being something that was supposed to happen was because if Marella's plan all along was for you to stay and trial her startup, I mean, I am now starting to get to the point in these podcast episodes where I think that everybody is in the story is potentially a bad person, and maybe that's not the right thing to do. So always correct me if I start to try to pin something on somebody.
No, this is certainly true. Like I would say in the recent times, you could compare her to Ghislaine Maxwell. So she's the person who is like that close to Sandesh, and this was staged from the very beginning. So there was never the intention for me, because when I met Giovanni the first time, he was super kind, open, interested in my work, interested in hiring me. And a week before, he couldn't even look me in the eye. There was no decent letting me down. There was just a 10-minute meeting, him scrolling through his phone and just telling me, and then he just sent me away. So there was also such a drastic change in personality of his that you can definitely tell that there was something off with that situation.
And when you say that he is friends with Marella, then that brings into question at this stage whether she had a hand in him either pretending that he was going to hire you or genuinely going to hire you and then making the decision not to, and to have that reaction, that cold reaction to you that he had when he was on his phone.
I think it was all staged from the very beginning, because the alumni meetup was already between women my age, and she was the only, I would say, middle-aged woman there. Right. So she was already 20 years older than all the others. And she offered internships not only to me, but also to other people, because her husband runs a business. So she was like, girls, I have internship. And I think at that point, she was already working on her startup, and she's very, very dependent on Sandesh and on money coming in and his goodwill. So I think she's very calculating. So I'm sure that this sort of, I will get you an internship, was from the very beginning some sort of grooming strategy to basically get to know me. Because maybe if she would have just said like, participate in my startup, I mean, yeah, it wouldn't have worked, I think, at that time.
You've got all the love bombing happening as well, with her making you feel at home and safe and comfortable. And then you come to her and you say, Marella, what's going on? What's happened with this internship? Do you know anything about this? And she's like, don't worry, here's a £2,000 dress. Like, it's kind of like, let me distract you from this, devastating piece of news that you've had with this lavish kind of display of how giving I am and how charitable I am. You have this $2,000 dress. I don't need it. It's just lying around. It's still got the price tag on. Here you can see that it, I don't know.
It was pricey. Yes. Yeah. It's sort of like this. And it was also the component of, I don't need your money. So it's like sort of, I'm offering you this opportunity. Also, I don't need your money. I'm like sort of already giving it back to you. So I didn't feel exploited at that stage, that I was sort of like giving something to her. I sort of felt I need to return something to her when paying the first trial. So I think this was also like the mechanism which she put me in the position of, oh, don't be so cheap and don't pay for my startup.
You paid for that so that you've said yourself, you didn't really want to be indebted to anybody, and you wanted to kind of keep the friendship equal in terms of she's doing you a favor, so you'll pay your own way in her startup, And now she's thrown this dress at you and you're kind of like, well, now what am I supposed to do?
But that was before the dress. So it was first the dress. And then she started asking me, don't you want to have? So I felt even more in debt.
Oh, I see. Okay. And you said the name Sandesh a number of times. Is this the man?
Yeah, so this comes later. This is the friend who she's known for 25 years. And his name is Michael Gilad, and he's originally an Israeli, but he has been living this podcast is about Osho now, or Bhagwan, as he's formerly known. So he has an ashram in Pune, and this is where he was basically trained by those people and then migrated to London. And he has some sort of former investment banking career. And this is when Marella and him met 25 years ago. So, and since then, and this later turned out, that's why I said she's very dependent on him. She has been working for him for the past 25 years in any kind of business. So he has his nose in a lot of things, and Marella was in some sort of way always employed for him. So, yeah.
Right. And we'll talk, I'm sure, about Sandesh in a lot more detail as we go on. But so you've had this initial internship fall through. Marella says it's fine, stick around, try the startup. During that time, we'll find you another internship, an even better internship. So what does her startup look like? You start to become involved, you take the first sessions, and what does all of that look like?
So the first sessions, I think I started in February or March 2017. And at that time, this is what I later found out. I was sort of the first person who was not connected to this group who tried the podcast. So not the podcast, the process. So I was like sort of their guinea pig who they tried it on, how it could work and how it should work and everything. So I started my first sessions and they were basically really harmless. It was like once a week, maybe 3 to 4 hours. So you log into this platform, you can still see that online. It's basically, you need to have a password. And they claim it to be like totally anonymous, which is it not, because they track your location, they will track your data from your laptop, they will get access to this. But this is what I only found out later. So basically what it looks like from the outside is that you log in anonymously, you choose a color, and then you're basically led into a chat room, which looks very, I would say, like very analog. There is nothing fancy. There are no pictures, nothing. It's just like a black room. And then which you don't know who it is at that time, starts asking questions about family, friends, sex life, what you're doing in life, how you're approaching life, how you could improve. So it's basically 3 hours of questions. And in between, there's sometimes a meditation or video or a TED talk from people, and then he lets you register about this. And by register, I mean that registering is something they claim to have invented, but it's basically that you just write up every thought which passes your mind, and you don't correct by like checking your grammar or checking if this is something which you should write in a chat room. So it's basically just emptying the mind. And that's what they do for hours. So, and besides that, so for example, one of the chats started with, this is a process, you've come here after you've been long in the desert and you finally arrived. And now you're sort of ready to liberate the beloved servant mind. And this is what it is all about. They monitor the process towards what they assume you need the most. So for some people, they come there and they want to have some like spiritual enlightenment, and then they call it, oh, this is the path to enlightenment. Or in my case, it was sort of like, I want to get like treatment because I had some symptoms from PTSD. So for me, this was all about finally healing yourself and getting healthy and everything. So they adjust the path to whatever your wishes or your goals are. And they basically claim that you come there and the mind is originally empty. So you're born as a baby and your mind has no experiences, or you don't have any experiences. Therefore, you don't have a bookstore in your mind, which has all these experiences and these borders created. And what they say is that most people suffer because they have this bookstore, which has some sort of, let's say, default by negative experiences, by traumas or anything like that. And what they basically want to do is they, through this process and through this different tools and mechanisms they offer to sort of dissociate you from this bookstore so that you see that you are not identified with the role or these experiences that you have had in your life, but that your true self is sort of behind that. And you can actually exist without your mind entering this, I don't know, I call it bookstore because it has all the experiences stored from you, which are positive and negative, but also all the mechanisms which would eventually protect you, because by making experiences, you learn and you understand what is good for you and what is bad. So you develop defense mechanisms. And so their goal is basically to dissociate you through the writing. And this is some sort of the first part by actually starting to write a lot. They first monitor what your issues are or how they can access you, but also through writing, like for many, many hours on different topics, you sort of see your own thoughts and your own thought patterns. So it gets easier for you to also step back from them and to understand yourself better, which is beneficial in the first part because you think like, oh, this is really helping me. It's sort of like journal writing before you go to bed. You just let loose and your thoughts are just all good. So this is something which they use is like 80% of what they do for you. You actually see, oh, it is working. It is helping me. I'm feeling better. And the abuse sort of happens in the other 20%. But this is also already, when I said like at the beginning, you already trust in a way. So you don't have your eyes that wide open anymore when abuse happens. So yeah, it's very complex. And I know I'm speaking a lot, but it's just because I feel like if I explain like every single step of how the process works, there are many tools and it's very complex, as I said before, but it doesn't like give you the whole understanding of what their intentions are. So at first, as I said, it's meditation, it's guidance, it's this raw registering, and it all feels very good. But later on, it just becomes very destructive.
To give us an oversight in the way that you have,
yeah,
I think will be beneficial to the episode, because now that we have that oversight, we can go through and pick apart different things.
But does it make sense? Because that's sometimes like the feedback I'm getting, that it's a bit overwhelming because it's not like straightforward. Like I can tell you they're like all wearing, I don't know, a certain color and they make you like pray, I don't know, 10 hours a day.
I think
it's not like that.
It's and I think, you know, not all groups are going to present with a in boxes, and that's why this type of work is so difficult. But there are certainly a number of things in what you've said there that can easily be pointed at and picked out as potential red flags in terms of collecting, you know, explain in a way, you know, the work that you put in with writing all of your thoughts. That's the work that you need to do in order to gain XYZ, whatever the process promises to give you through putting the work in. But of course, with that, you're announcing lots of very deep, personal, vulnerable things about yourself in that writing, which is being monitored by people and read by people who can then use that information against you later on to make life more difficult for you, or to determine how you make decisions or answer questions. And when you've spoken about your PTSD in some of this writing with the hopes that you will overcome this struggle that you have, it's difficult then to know what will happen with that information when the intentions of this group aren't as pure as you first thought they were. So sometimes I think it is difficult for some people to listen to things about cults in air quotes, because everybody has a different way of kind of describing what that word means. So it's a tough one, but some may say, they made us wear uniforms, and some may say, they made us write down our every thought. And it's so it's I think the way that you've the bird's eye view that you've given us is a great place to start, because now we can go through and look at the different systems that were in place within that overview you've given us, and to kind of look at that 20% you mentioned about the abusive parts that started happening to you as you kind of became deeper and deeper involved in this group. So you start off doing like kind of light work, as you said, nothing too heavy. It's kind of a couple of hours here and there. How did the sessions change? Does it ramp up in terms of how much time you're supposed to commit to the sessions? Do they become more regular throughout the week?
Yeah, like in my case, it started like 3 hours a week. And then, my case was special because I was basically alone in Munich with no big social network, and I had a lot of spare time. So I was very easy for them to access. And then Marella just started like calling me and asking me if I don't want to become more involved and maybe even start working for her. But I was still very persistent on my internship. So she then gave me some addresses in Munich as well, where I could approach some people, but they all declined me. So I was sort of like forced to just stay and do something for her. And so they increased until I would say 6 to 8 hours daily. And this also included, like, after 1 or 2 months, I then was contacted via the chat room by Sandesh. And Sandesh sort of told me that he thinks that I'm very, intelligent, brave, and so on. And he would ask me if I don't want to become more involved in his work. But this would require some deeper commitment, and I would need to learn a lot before I can actually be involved in his work. And it was always like they just wanted me to become really involved and really committed. And through that I was already sort of isolated. I didn't have like anyone sort of like at that time, of course, highlighting the red flags to me. So, and then I was also still suffering from those symptoms. So for me, it was still like, okay, I can just take this month or two and just try to heal myself. And maybe, you start thinking, you're like, oh, maybe this is all meant to be, no one else. Because at that time, I didn't think that someone would stage all of that. So you just start of thinking, oh, maybe this is just a lucky coincidence, and maybe these people can really help me. So I was also very open in committing to it. And I was introduced to my personal GP. Her name is Alina, Dr. Gideon. And she is a doctor. And at that time, I was believing that she's actually practicing in London. But I later found out that she's in Romania and that she's just occasionally flown into London to have medical sessions with her clients. But she is a real GP, let's say. And so she basically started giving me nutrition plans, asking me, I had maybe a day, 1 to 2 hours only in the chat room with her, where we were going through my medical history. I was supposed to submit the medical history from basically my past 10 years. So I was organizing all of that. So they had like the full picture, and I was still believing that, oh my God, they're showing me like so much I don't know, care and so much honesty, I thought, from like the very beginning, starting with Marella already back then in London. So I just considered myself very lucky at that time. And yeah, I think they just built a very stable foundation of trust in those months, where I had sometimes daily calls with Alina, where she was asking me how I'm feeling, what she can do for me today, where I was also supposed to write like a journal about, I don't know, just healthcare. And I mean, Osho and the tools which they have been very successful as well. I mean, they are tools which are not used in, let's say, the school medicine, but still they are very efficient, especially for things which are, let's say, trauma related. I think they have done a lot of research since the 70s, 80s in that field. And the essential thing is basically that the tools which they give you are not bad tools or the tactics. It's just how they apply them, which makes them bad. But if you would have just gotten the tools or how they can help you, it is a very good thing. And this is what they do in the beginning, where you actually see, oh my God, those are like the first people on earth which actually understand what my issues are and which supply like reasonable help to me. So, and I can give like a very good example for that, how they turn a very good tool around. It's basically so you're sort of meditating for a lot of time during the day. And when he then during the chat, Sandesh or Alina, sometimes they invite you to like have all bad feelings or invite all bad feelings to yourself. So you really think of all the horrible things which have happened in your life, and you just feel like this sadness arising, or maybe frustration or anger or fear. And you just really feel like your chest and your body becoming tense. And then they ask you, so where in your body do you feel that sensation now? And then you, first of all, you go to this sort of like meta level where you look down for the first time on you experiencing those feelings, which is very beneficial because you don't identify with them anymore at that step. And then by doing so, I started mainly like feeling them in my chest. So I started feeling this sort of like vibration or energy field, let's call it that, of those negative feelings I had invited. And the next step, they ask you to actually enter that field. So with all your consciousness, you're then entering that energy field. And by doing so, I mean, you can try that at home. It really works. You actually dissolve the feeling itself. So you realize that you are not the feeling, you're not the sensation, and that you're actually beyond all of that. And so they claim that every negative feeling only holds for 90 seconds. That's like the nature of feelings and sensations. And if you enter it and use this tactic, let's say several times a day, you experience that you don't have to experience negative feelings because you learn to sort of dissolve them. And in the first like month, this is like, you feel amazing because every time like you're like during the day, something comes up, instead of like in your head, like shutting all doors and like, oh my God, I don't want to like see this or hear this. You're just like opening everything and you're like, okay, come here, like try to overwhelm me. And it doesn't work anymore because you have become stronger than this.
Wow. Okay.
So it was very empowering, especially for someone who has had like trauma in her life, to like suddenly see that you can like leave all the doors open and even invite it, and still it will not overwhelm you or end in a panic attack or something like that. So that was really, really beneficial. And then they switch it. And this is what I mean. So when the abuse then happens, which was only like after 5 to 6 months it started, they tell you, well, if you feel bad because of the abuse, it's your own fault, because we have taught you that negative feelings only last for 90 seconds. So if you keep on feeling bad about what we've done to you or what somebody said, it's your own fault, because you keep your mind chattering about that. And by that, you just hold it in your mind, but it's not even in your body anymore. So this is the tool which they first introduce it to you. You're super grateful, you're very trusting, and then they basically proclaim it to be, they have already dissolved also your defense mechanisms, and by that they basically just turn it around. So
and given you a cure for all negative feelings and doubts. So if you're kind of second guessing the motives or intentions behind some of the things that they may start to do, that's your fault, because they've given you the equipment that you need to deal with any of those doubts or issues that you have. So very precarious situation that you're then put in, because of course you might look inwards at yourself then and be like, okay, so if it's my fault, what am I doing wrong? Why I've been practicing this work for ages and for months. So if I'm feeling bad about this, or I'm having second thoughts about any of this stuff, what is it that I'm doing wrong with this process for it to not work for me right now? And that's very dangerous indeed, because like you said, that they've broken down your defense mechanisms, and you're left with no tools left to help yourself get out of that situation by that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's similar in some ways, some of the things that you've mentioned, you know, with kind of the doctor asking for you to kind of keep like a diary of your healthcare and to give a medical history, then to kind of keep a log of what you're maybe like eating and drinking, like a diet, like a diet log. That kind of feels very much like what we've seen in previous Nexium documentaries about how the people who were kind of being brought into the inner circle were being asked to only consume a certain amount of calories a day. And even with the process that you talked about, you know, on a basic level, the principles of it are very beneficial to an average user of those tools. But it's so it's kind of similar to, I've said this before on the show, to Dianetics with Scientology. If you read Dianetics and apply it at a basic level, then some of it is quite helpful for like basic life skills. But when you start to then kind of say to people, okay, well, to unlock the next level of wisdom, you need to pay this money and commit this extra time to Scientology, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And you're in an extra vulnerable position because, as you've mentioned, you're very isolated where you're living. Your kind of only common friends are people involved in this group. And your closest confidant is Marella at this point, because she's the one that's promised to get you the internship, which has landed you in this place of isolation in the first place.
Yes.
And she has said, you know, just stick with me, you know, oh, I promise we'll get you an internship. Actually, here's a list of numbers for you to try right now. And when all of those fall through, you know, there's the promise of, okay, we'll keep trying, we'll keep looking. But until then, why don't you log on to this session and give your entire medical history for the last 10 years to this doctor who's not actually living in London, but actually in Romania, and I'm sure is very good friends with Sandesh.
Yeah. No, she was his personal doctor. So basically their relationship was really close. And like all the people Sandesh keeps in his inner circle, they're super dependent on him. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're all as calculating as Marella, but I would say some of them have also just been trapped in there, and they might have children or something. And they're deeply vulnerable. Their defense mechanisms, their thinking mechanisms are so torn down that they are not in a state where they can still make reasonable decisions. So, and I mean, they're all in a childlike state. This is sort of the end point of liberating the mind. And I mean, liberating the mind basically means stop thinking. And by being trapped in sort of a meditative state where you don't allow your mind to chatter and tell you things anymore. And if it does, because that's the nature of the mind, that it tells you things, you don't trust it anymore, because you feel that you're only your true self if you are in this meditative, silent state.
Quiet, yeah.
Yeah.
And how much are you expected to pay for these sessions? I know that you have kind of this agreement with Marella, where she's kind of like, don't pay for the sessions, but kind of you're like, but I'll pay. And she's like, no, don't pay. If it was like me walking in today, how much would I pay for these sessions?
I don't know what their prices are today, but I think it's between the 1,800 to 2,500 pounds per month. So, and this only this includes, like, I would say, the outer circle. And if you want to have like some private sessions with Sandesh, I think he takes like 1,500 pounds an hour. Whoa. So it's really expensive.
So Sandesh has followed Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh in the 60s and 70s?
I think a bit later, but probably in like the 90s to 2000s, he was one of the like closest people there. And by now he's one of the main shareholders of the Osho International Foundation. So he's not just someone who has been trained by them and then sent to like open some centers or something. No, he's like, I think he sees himself as like the next Osho. So he's very involved in those mechanisms, but also very involved in the business part of the whole foundation. So it's not only that he's like, let's say, running his meditation or yoga studio or something and just like grooming some people in. He's really one of the people who run the business, the main business of Osho International.
And he has come away. So he's spent a lot of time around Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. He's learned from him in terms of leadership and being a guru or being kind of I'm just reading a memoir at the moment and actually interviewing the author tomorrow of her memoir, A Slice of Orange, where she followed Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, and she speaks in her memoir about the people that are closest to Bhagwan have a different mala around their neck, an older version with a picture of Bhagwan in the middle. And those people are supposed to have a direct line to Bhagwan, who is supposed to be like a direct line to the divine. So it's like you've got that kind of pyramid coming through there. So would you say that Sandesh would perhaps be classed as one of these people that has like a direct line to Bhagwan, or had a direct line to Bhagwan when he was still alive?
Yeah, I'm certain of that. Like he was one, like he still is. He's one of the, I mean, there are 5 people left to really, like, I would say, on top of that hierarchy. And he's one of them. So, and back then, I don't know if he had a direct line or how much time he had spent with Bhagwan when he was still alive. But I know that he had already invested a lot of money buying houses in that Pune ashram. He lived there for a certain time. I think he also lived in the US, where he was involved with them. So, but I think at that time, it was still, they were less dangerous, because even though they had a lot of people accumulated, still they were easy to see, because they were wearing orange robes. They were identifying themselves as, we are following this guru Osho. But I mean, today they have launched so many centers, so many online platforms in like the new wellness movement, where they especially target young people and university students, where they don't even want to be associated to Osho or Bhagwan anymore. And I mean, by now you do find some articles online where they actually mention that Osho and Bhagwan are the same person. But when I entered the process, for me, Osho was more like, I sometimes like saw him like scrolling through Instagram with some like quotes, some love quotes, or I saw the books or something. So I did not even know about the 70s, 80s movement because I didn't even associate Bhagwan to Osho. So I think that's what makes them sort of, I wouldn't even say they are a cult. I would say they're more of a mafia, because the way how they operate, I mean, if you go to Scientology church or to one of their meetings, at least they're open about, hey, we're Scientology, we follow this or that ideology. But I mean, this group, they spend so much effort in hiding and so much effort in not being associated with the bad things which Bhagwan and Osho has done. So I feel like cult, I personally don't associate them with the cult. I'm more like, okay, this is some sort of criminal mafia organization which really works in the underground and has managed in the past 30 years to build such a broad network worldwide, where they basically practice the same sinister mechanisms Bhagwan has taught in the 70s. But you go there. I mean, I've always made this comparison. If you go to Scientology, your body and your mind has some defense mechanism. You find critical material about them online. And with this group, you're just thrown into the cold. And if you have a person who you've known from the past or who has a close connection to you, who you already trust, I mean, you're basically like a blind sheep just being followed along. And I mean, even now I've tried to place critical material online and it is being deleted in a couple of days, basically. So, I mean, it is very, very difficult to place. I mean, they censor everything which is out there, which has a critical voice towards them. And this is what makes them so dangerous, because any other cult, any other group, they just at least stand to what they're doing. And I mean, they won't confirm that they're bad or sinister or anything, but at least they don't try to whitewash everything into that they're only good and what they have done in the past was only good. So I feel this is what makes them so dangerous.
You've summarized there perfectly exactly why this group is distancing its association with Bhagwan and Osho as well, though, because there is so much information now available online that if you were to be approached by somebody on the street who says, hey, come and join my wellness group, it'll change your life, they give you the tools that you need to overcome any ill mental health, and you're like, wow, that sounds great, what's the name of it? If they say, oh, it's part of Osho International, and I'm like, okay, cool. I go home and I Google Osho International and I find the Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country, and I watch that and I realize that the origins of the Osho International Company came from this guru who had all of these people follow him and did all of these things. I'm going to be like, yeah, no thanks. But because of that negative affiliation, they're kind of almost rebranding themselves and hiding in the margins, but still using Bhagwan's work and guidelines and templates and teachings and influence that he had on people like Sandesh that followed him so devoutly for so many years, who are now taking those control and coercion tactics and applying them to their own line of work that is extorting and exploiting young university students like yourself, who are just looking to get your foot in the right, on get your foot in the door of your career path, and you're being given that promise. And this is why a lot of the time university students are targeted, because first of all, a lot of them have moved to a new place. So that transition in life means that you might be more open to trying new things. It might mean that you aren't around familiar friends or family anymore. So when you meet this group of people that open their arms to you and give you all the love in the world, and they're all like, oh my goodness, I love what you're wearing, and I love your fashion style, and your voice is so nice to listen to, and your hair is lovely, and wow, you're so clever and intelligent, and laugh at all your jokes and all of these things. And you're like, oh my goodness, I'm being accepted inside and out, head to toe. This is amazing for me, you know. So university students are a very particular demographic that we often hear about on this show, are targeted by various organizations because of all of these different periods of transition and upheaval and change in lifestyle. You know, when I first went to university, I'd never done yoga, but found myself kind of suddenly doing yoga. So, you know, even me, myself in that position, like Bob said yesterday, who I interviewed, if you come across for them anyway, the perpetrator, if you come across the right person at the right time and they start speaking to you, that's it. You have no chance. It doesn't matter what kind of person you are, what walk of life you're from, how good your critical thinking is, or how well versed you think you are in cult-like methods of control. You know, Bob basically explicitly said in the episode yesterday that I recorded with him, which funnily enough originated from his daughter meeting this influential man who had also followed Bhagwan.
Okay.
So and then obviously I'm doing this recording tomorrow with Nicola, whose memoir I've just read about her time following Bhagwan. So my whole week has been like Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh.
I've all staged that, you know, they're all from my side now.
Yeah, it's all it's all perhaps divine intervention, but that it's if you come across a certain person at a certain time in your life and they get to talking with you, then you know, that's, some people stand no chance against that. And it's particularly difficult to hear that any demographic is targeted, because then that just kind of proves that there is systematically things being done. It's not just, oh, I think Sarah might really enjoy our wellness program. It's, let's go to this alumni meeting because there will be students of this age and they're the ones that we want to target, because we know that this particular process work will be easier to do with people Sarah's age and people looking to get into the line of work that Sarah wants to get into. And it makes your skin crawl when you think about people exploiting other people in that way. It's kind of like advertising, isn't it? Which is also something Bob said in his interview with me yesterday, is kind of like, you know, there's influence all around us, and advertisers are like, oh, let's advertise this because in this part of the world, because there are more women between the age of 25 and 45 that live in this particular region, and they're the ones that need new frying pans. So let's advertise our new frying pans here. And it does make you feel uncomfortable. But
and I think it's also that they target university students because they want to use them later on. I mean, what I've heard from Sandesh many times is that people fulfill a function in his life. And I mean, if you surround yourself with academic people who tend to have good jobs in the future, I mean, you can rely on them, and the group itself will have a better standing, because people will see like, oh my God, like mostly I would say like educated people who participate in it and who are smart and they follow him. I mean, it must be good. So I've also heard that they mainly target people who are very influential and try to pull them, because I mean, that's how they reach a broader scale. And I think it's also very true what Bob said, that if they come at the right time, you cannot defend them if you're innocent enough. And I think that they're really, really good at mirroring. So they're masters at that. I mean, they can hide their true identity. They will just appear as a mirror in front of you, and you will be like, oh my God, I finally found my counterpart. So Yeah, I think that's very true what he said.
At some point, you're in these sessions and Sandesh appears in one of your sessions and says to you, I think you're very intelligent. I think you could go really far in this company, but there's lots that you need to do before that can happen. And are you aware of who Sandesh is at this point? Are you kind of like, oh my goodness, he's come to speak to me, this is a big deal? Or were you kind of just like, oh, I don't really know
I never saw... I usually don't see anyone like that. So maybe this is also an issue because I don't get scared easily. So I think I never saw him as an authority. But at that time when he first approached me, I had no face. I had nothing. I didn't know at that time what he was working for me. He was basically just the man who runs Marella's startup and old friends. So, but then as I said, I was respecting the work at first, and I did find it beneficial. So I thought, oh my God, I've been suffering from these symptoms for the past 6 years, and I had not received any real beneficial help from the school medicine. So I thought this is something which has to be spread. And I was very open in being a participant and getting more committed. So despite not knowing at that time who he was. And the first meeting I had with him was, I think, already 2 months later when I got more involved. And this was in Kew Garden. So I met him the first time with Marella and Camilla. Camilla is another friend of Marella who's also involved in this startup. And I met him, and it was really strange because Marella sort of briefed me before driving there that he is a bit strange and he doesn't talk to you and you have to respect him, and he is enlightened, and that he's like really, really intelligent, and that you should only speak to him when he approaches you. So, I mean, I was like 22 at that time, and I was like, all right. And these are like all like 40 something women. And I was like, I still had this sort of like, yeah, they're not teenagers anymore. So, I mean, they must have a certain understanding, but still they're like speaking weird stuff. But I was still like, okay, let's see where this leads. And then when I met him, I was like so shocked because he's really old. He's really fat. I need to say that. I know it's not a nice thing to say, but he really is. And he's just like, I know he's like a second version of Harvey Weinstein. So when I met him, I was like quite shocked. And I was like, okay, how can this man preach about being healthy and having like a good lifestyle if you come across like that? But I was like, okay, we're just going to have a look and see how it goes. So we were basically entering Kew Gardens, and he was walking like 3 meters in front of us. So Marella, Camilla, and we were just walking silently, not speaking anything behind him. And like I was like always like making eye contact with Marella, but she was like really serious, Camilla as well. So, and then we finally approached a coffee shop, and we were all sitting down, and still like no one has said a word. There was only like some eye contact, nothing else. And then like Marella and Camilla, they were both like, I don't know, like some sort of like desperately looking at Sandesh. And this situation was like so weird because you see like all the like normal behaving people around you in the garden, and you're like, okay, something is so off. And I remember I just started laughing. I couldn't hold it anymore. So, and the interesting situation, like he started laughing as well. So there you saw that there was no seriousness from him behaving like that. This was just something he would do because people just committed to this behavior. And this is something, another conversation I had with him once was when he was like, yeah, I trained them to not think, but I actually use my mind very well to get what I want. So, I mean, this is something I've read about Bhagwan as well, because after I left, I had a lot of like research, and I wanted to know like what was behind that. And this is something which people who have left the group, I mean, in many interviews, they were asked, like, do you think Bhagwan really cared about the people? And they all say, no, he had nothing for them. This was all just part of, I don't know, the con man stage, sort of. And just because he could behave that well, because people would reflect in a certain manner to that and be like, so this is exactly the situation. And I mean, it's so strange that he gets people to behave that way, but at the same time, he's totally conscious of how strange it is, but he just pulls it through. So, yeah.
Sandesh is supposedly enlightened, if you go by what Marella has told you by this point. And Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh also was supposedly enlightened. And when you're enlightened, you have no need for things like ego anymore. But if Sandesh is asking people to behave in a certain way just because he knows that he can do that, is that not then feeding the ego? This is like probably a really...
Yeah, but that's only because you need people to listen. Well, first of all, you need to give the mind something they can chew on. So it's basically, if you give them some sort of ideology, which they don't have, their only ideology is you need to dissolve the ego to be your true self. At least there's some sort of guidance. But of course, I mean, that's what I mean. They don't even, like, at that moment, he did not even pretend anymore that this is some sort of like serious behavior which has to be followed. But it's basically just because if you dissolve a person's ego, they don't have wishes anymore. They don't have, as I said, self-defense mechanisms anymore. So you basically dissolve the person, the personality itself. And I mean, this only works if you feed people over and over again the sentence that you become your best self or your true self only if you don't have this ego, which is your personality, in fact, anymore. And I mean, the people who benefit from it the most are the people who keep their personality, which is in that case very sinister, and who just, I don't know, when I asked him once, like, what he's doing with the private clients, which pay £1,500 an hour, he's basically told me, well, he just presses their buttons and then they behave in whatever way. So, I mean, it's so like now I can laugh about it, but I mean, this is so harmful to people. And people come there with, like, they spend a lot of money. They put their lives in his hands. And someone has also suicided himself during the process. So, I mean, the things which he does only to pleasure, I don't know, his sadistic nature really costs people lives and destroys them. So, and in that moment, and this was in the very beginning, this was the first time I met him. So I think my lack for authority there sort of like broke the situation. Yeah.
What was Morella's reaction to you laughing? Was she kind of like shocked and panicked?
Yeah, they were like, I don't know. I think she was just like sitting there, and like Camilla as well, and they were just like staring at me, and they couldn't like really believe like why I would do such a thing. So yeah, but it was very interesting. And I mean, like, then afterwards I was supposed to like even have private sessions with Camilla, meaning I would walk with Camilla in the garden. And private sessions always mean that you walk next to each other and one person just shatters the mind, meaning that she tells you everything, what is going on, and which makes her sad. And I remember this was like a few days later when she broke down in tears to me. And I was just like a 22-year-old. She was going through marriage. She had a daughter, which was 5-year-old. And I was like 22-year-old walking with a woman who just bursts down in tears. And this was just like my job to walk with her and to sort of like monitor her.
And this is Camilla.
Camilla is a friend of Marella, who Marella has also groomed into it. And she's supposed to build up the platform. And Camilla was, like I said, she's also super dependent on Sandesh because she has been married to her husband for 10 or 15 years. She has never worked. She has basically gone from her family to her husband, had a child. So she has never been in any other environment. And then they basically had marriage problems. Then Marella came in and she told her that she has someone who can fix their problems and help them to actually stabilize their marriage.
Oh my goodness.
Then they met Sandesh. And of course, in Sandesh's interest, it's to break them up, to divorce them, so he can make both people unstable and to actually exploit both of them, probably the husband financially. And then he offered a job to Camilla, where she's totally dependent emotionally and financially on him. And how he gets the trust from both sides is basically that he sells himself as the lawyer of their child to make sure that the child won't suffer any trauma from their divorce. So you see, it is all from the very beginning. It is all very calculated. It is all, how do I get actually both sides on board? This is only through having the child's best at his heart, let's say. So it's all...
Oh my goodness, that's so predatory. I don't understand how, obviously, if his intention is to exploit the husband and the wife simultaneously by posing to have the kid's best interests at heart, then it's most likely in the long run that the kid will suffer the most in the situation, because both parents have been equally traumatized in one way or another through being involved with Sandesh himself.
Yeah, but that's the goal. I mean, if the child is also traumatized, he will have another client in the future.
Of course.
And he will have someone to talk. So it's never, the cycle is never to actually get you stable and healthy. It's to get you deeper in and traumatized even more. So you will be even more dependent on them.
And would you mind if I've got a picture up on my phone of who I think Sandesh is. Yeah. Would you mind if I showed you the picture?
Yeah, of course.
Is this, I don't know if you can see, if it's not.
Oh, no, that's not him. You have to Google Michael Gilad. Use it then, because if you Google him and open the page, the website will track your IP address and could eventually open some things.
Ooh, really?
Yeah, they're like really on top of that things.
That is scary, isn't it? Oh my goodness. I don't want so you should like hide your
IP. Like that's, yeah, definitely.
It's not the guy in the red, is it?
Yes. Yeah, it's the guy in the red shirt.
Oh my goodness. Okay. That he is not what the first picture I showed you when I was like, okay, I can see how, he's like he fit the look, but this guy does not fit the look of like an enlightened.
See, that's what I meant. That's why I was so shocked when I first met him. I mean, and he's like, I don't know, 200 pounds or something. So maybe like 180 tall. So it's not the person but that's the same. I mean, if you look at Bhagwan from an objective perspective, he's like a small Indian guy who couldn't walk and who didn't seem to have a healthy lifestyle from the outside, and still people believed to follow him for health reasons. So
Sandesh pops into your session. He says, come and join me. You go to this walk through the garden. You end up laughing. He ends up laughing. Morella's kind of like, kind of like realizes that it's actually okay to laugh. She joins in. And then you go for a walk with Camilla. It's your job to kind of be like her open ear, her listening ear, kind of like you're kind of having a face-to-face session at that point, instead of being in the black kind of electronic room where you're typing all of your thoughts as they come to you. You're kind of going on a walk with somebody and doing it vocally out loud in person instead of writing it all down. Is that what you would say it's equal to?
Yes, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Just another way to practice the process. So same kind of methodology, but just a different way of doing it, and keeps you. And then Camilla starts crying.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, okay, so she's kind of has what happens after this? You this is kind of 5 to 6 months in, you continue to have kind of more and more and more time.
So this was sort of like 3 to 4 months. And after, I mean, I only stayed within that group for 6 months. And then I have been followed for a couple of years. But my consciously being involved with the group was only for 6 months. So I think from like February 2017 to September 2017. And well, after that session, I mean, then the thing is that those people are already so open and vulnerable and childlike. I think that's the right word, because Camilla and Marella have already participated in a process for a year or even longer. So they were just like little children, which wouldn't believe their own thoughts anymore, or would even decline to think on their own anymore. And this is something which I think was also like the goal with me, of course. So all the things which were in the beginning to sort of like intrude me and let me know how intelligent or how brave or whatever I was, this was never to go to actually fuel these things so they can grow, but it was like the ultimate goal to destroy all of that and to also get me in that like permanent childlike state. And so basically after that session, I mean, there were a couple of more meetings also with Marella and Camilla, but I declined from a very early stage on to work with them because I didn't see that thing going anywhere. And I had also lost some sort of like respect for both of them. So I mean, mostly for Marella, because I think Camilla was a target herself who wasn't really conscious about what was happening around her. So I think that I just declined. And then there was another group where the Dr. Alina Gideon, was also building up her own platform, offering a more medical related process. And Sandesh was also like always trying to some sort of like push me in one of those groups, work together with these women who many of them had sexual relationships with him and who were really dependent on him. So I never really respected any of them. So I think I was always like being difficult, not wanting to work with them. So, and another thing was that I went back to London and I really wanted to pursue my fashion studies. So despite being like involved in all of that, I was just never really that like, I don't know, spiritually or enlightened interested. I just thought it also works without being enlightened. So I think that's maybe also what made them like target me for so long and like stalking me, because I feel like, I mean, if you have the personality structure, what Sandesh has, I mean, it's a highly narcissistic, sadistic person who just thinks he can get everyone to do whatever or fulfill whatever functions he wants them to fulfill. And I think if there just comes like a student who has no finished education, who's 20 years old, and who just tells him to basically, I don't know, excuse my language, go fuck himself. I mean, I think it's really difficult for such a person to accept that. And I think that's what has brought me to that situation. Like I just told you, that they have been hacking my phones, monitoring my laptops. And I think for them, it's an affront against them, and especially against Sandesh. So I feel I've been more involved in his circle rather than having so much overlaying with Bhagwan and Osho and all of that. So I think it's more of a personal matter. Yeah.
Exactly the same as Bob's story yesterday and his daughter Alexandra, who went on to follow Bo. He was like a 40-something-year-old man, and Bob's 16-year-old daughter Alexandra ended up following Bo.
Oh wow! Mm-hmm.
It's a very difficult episode, and I'm actually speaking to Alexandra next week as well. So I'll have kind of the whole kind of father and daughter perspective of the story. But I had this almost like revelation during my conversation yesterday that was quite profound and hard for me to digest in the moment. That when I speak to people about their experiences in these high demand control groups or coercive groups or groups that have undue influence, manipulation, control tactics, I always think about the right steps for those people to take to recover and repair and to not be defined by their experience, and to kind of make sure that they know that there is a possibility of a happy and fulfilled life after these experiences. And I try and make that point by asking people how they've recovered and what advice they would recommend for people that have been through similar experiences. Mm-hmm. But yesterday it occurred to me that people will follow somebody like Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, and they will learn from those leaders, and they will adopt the same practices and principles of those teachers, and they will then go on to do awful, horrible, and heinous things themselves, using those same influences that they have learned from those people that they followed so closely for so long. And it feels like Sandesh is absolutely possibly one of these people. He has a very clear system in place that he has kind of got Marella and others on board to make sure that this vision and this system is fulfilled. He has people in the places he would like them to be. He's got new people coming in, such as yourself, and he's approaching you and saying what he thinks you'll be really good for. And when you say no, you are then put in a position of great vulnerability, because not only because of the practice and the process that you've been working on, which has left you vulnerable and desensitized to your own critical thinking, it's then meant that you are pursued by Sandesh and his own group of devout followers to ensure that you then fulfill the role that he wants you to, as you mentioned, somebody him needs to have. So that was a kind of like a very profound thing for me to realize yesterday, that not everybody that falls away from their group is falling away negatively. Some of them are just collecting what they've learned and then applying it to their own individual circumstances, which is a terrifying thought. And Sandesh seems to kind of potentially be one of those people that has gone on to do that.
Is with him that he has not fallen away. I mean, he's still very much in the Osho Bhagwan system. I mean, he's super connected to them. He makes connections with fundraisers to like fund new centers and everything. He also has the clinic in the Netherlands, which is the picture you just saw. So he runs a clinic in the Netherlands, which is called Osho Human University, and he also runs an Ayurvedic clinic. So, I mean, he at least is someone where you sort of like, once you're in the system, you can predict that he is connected to Osho and Bhagwan. But I'm sure you're right that there are a lot of people who just go there for, I think you need a year or so to really like get to the inner mechanisms, who read the system and who then just go out and they just start their own business and apply that system to whatever they find it useful for. So, and I think that's what I said, I mean, which will then not be linked to Osho or Bhagwan, and which will then be just exploiting people without any connection to it. Yeah. And I think what you said before is also true. I mean, the least of things he executes himself, all the people Sandesh has in place, which he calls his functions, I mean, they're basically executing his will for him. And like you said, I mean, the least dangerous is him himself, because he's an old man who doesn't want to travel and to do anything. But I mean, he basically has unlimited financial resources. He has a really vast network, which you can acquire. And I mean, people have been following and approaching me the past years. And most of these people, I believe, they're not bad people. They don't have the full picture. They don't know anything about the story. They're just being told that I might be, I don't know, one of a poor sheep who has gotten away, who maybe has like some mental issues or something, who needs help from them. And I mean, some things, how they can usually motivate people to do all of these things is by telling them that they're doing something good, they're helping me, and that I need help and that I need to be brought back into that group. So that's what my experience is. And that's what also makes it very difficult for me, because whenever I meet new people, those people, they cannot even be linked to Osho or Bhagwan. Like, those are not all spiritual people. Like I said before, they're not all wearing robes or anything. So they're just normal people who have been told different stories about myself, and they really strongly believe that they're doing something good by approaching me. So it makes it really difficult, because I'd rather have Sandesh fly to my home, just stand in front of my door and approach me himself. But I mean, in my opinion, he doesn't have the guts for that. So he just lets it do through other channels. Yeah.
Were your friends and family aware at any point that you were involved with this particular movement or with this wellness group?
Yeah, like my mother, she was involved. Like, she knew that I was in contact with Marella. She knew that I was very sad that my internship fell through, and she also thought that it was a good idea to like focus on my health for a month or two. And I think she noticed like a very strong change in my behavior, that I became more closed towards her, not close. And that I thought, like, as I said in the first couple of months, that they have finally, I don't know, shown something to the world which the world really needs. So I got really engaged to them. I also sent their files to my friends, which thankfully none of them committed to any of that, because for some it was too expensive, or other thought they don't need enlightenment at that point in their lives. So, but I mean, the stronger they will get and the more diverse they will get in the future, I feel like it will become much easier for them to target other young people. Because when I was approached by Marella, the process in an online format was still in the very beginning. And they sort of started experiencing how they can still achieve with people what they would have achieved in an ashram or in person. But by now, I mean, and during Corona, people are suffering much more in an isolated state. They're being alone. They're seeking for connection. And I mean, by evolving that online format, I think by now they have gotten much more powerful. And I think it's much easier through the current situation, to actually target people.
We are living in an age that has seen, in these particular parts of the world at least, some of the highest levels of isolation, I imagine, experienced by people for decades, maybe centuries, with people kind of not being allowed to socialize, not being allowed to visit loved ones, not being allowed to be around friends by law, having to stay inside your home. And if that means that, you know, your kids can't visit you, or your grandkids can't visit you, or your friends can't visit you, it's been so tough for so many different people in so many different circumstances. And I was asking the question at the start of the episodes a year or so ago about how do each of my guests think coronavirus has affected the particular movement that we were discussing that day on the show. And some of them have said, like, you know, oh, because we do face-to-face sermons, or because we do face-to-face group work, I think that maybe the numbers will be suffering. But then a lot of people have also said now they've introduced these new levels of Zoom meetings. And if you turn your camera off in the Zoom meeting, you're being asked to turn your...
Today's customers expect fast, personalized support. Intercom has the tools you need to deliver just that, efficiently, at any scale. Supercharge your team's productivity and make your customers super happy with Intercom. Learn more at intercom.com/support.
Camera back on. And if you don't turn your camera back on, you're being reprimanded after the session and told that you need to come back and do extra work to make up for the fact that you didn't have your camera turned on. or you've muted your microphone because you're eating, and you'll get a message to say, please unmute your microphone. Or if you don't turn up to a Zoom meeting, you'll have emails and phone calls and text messages to ask why you weren't there. So it's kind of almost like the electronic side of things has opened a gateway to, aside from the phone and laptop tracking that we'll talk about with you soon, it's kind of opened a gateway for you to be even more monitored than you would have been if somebody was just sitting across the room from you, like watching your every move physically. It's like timestamps and date stamps and electronic trails of where you've been and what you've been doing. And, you can see on the Zoom record who attended the meeting, how long they were there for, you can watch the recording back. You can listen back to the audio if you record the session. So it's in some ways the coronavirus and the pandemic has meant that some people in high demand control groups have had time to have a good meal and a good sleep and think about the fact that something is not right. And they've been able to formulate that idea, mull it over, and have time to think about it independently, maybe discuss it with somebody away from that environment. But on the flip side of that, you've got the situation that you've just explained, where people are more isolated than ever and very susceptible to somebody coming to them and saying, oh, you're really suffering with this isolation. It's brought on a bout of depression. I tell you what I can do for you. I can help you overcome that depression with this very systematic approach to wellness, which is very dangerous.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think it can go in both directions. And I mean, it's very unfortunate that COVID has hit us so strong, because like that, those platforms, which have been in place since 2015, 16, now they can really, as you said, monitor people on a different level.
Yeah. And these systems that they've had in place for such a long amount of time now, they've had a good amount of time to practice these processes and almost perfect them in time for the pandemic to hit, where they are really then able to ramp up their message and their ideology and their method. It's hard to kind of, because even students haven't been in education, so they've kind of been working from home, and everyone's been working from home. But it's a really hard one. It's like now my mind's reeling about all of this pandemic stuff and thinking about all of the things that might be happening now. But you mentioned that you sent the program to some of your friends, and luckily none of them decided to kind of come on board. Is that something that you were encouraged to do, or something that you wanted to do off your own back?
No, I was encouraged to do that too. I mean, this was the goal, to like then have my own platform or with Marella together, and to acquire as many people as possible. And of course, but I mean, I wanted that at that time as well. I believed I was doing something good and offering something good. So, yeah. But I mean, also like my friends at that time, they noticed that I was like, my voice was different and I was like much softer. And I think that's also something because they acquire women to only use their passive mind, which they say is the state of like meditate. Well, there's like, they say there's the active and the passive mind, and the active mind is basically if you think actively and if you apply critical thinking, and the passive mind is basically if you're locked in this meditative state. And they encourage mostly women to just be passive and just be love and like not apply any thinking skills. So I think this is also something which has been visible or I don't know, audible through my voice. So my voice really changed, and that's what my friends noticed, that it just lost power and it sounded like a child, like it was really soft and really like calm and everything. So I think if you pay attention, if you have close people in your environment, they will notice a change. And I mean, I definitely like, even in my voice, I mean, they had some workshops which they called Finding Your Own Voice, which were basically also through singing and everything, but it was all just made so you would become like really calm and really like defenseless and everything. So, yeah.
something interesting that you said just in that small passage then was that women specifically were coached to behave a certain way. So were men and women treated differently under Sandesh's processes?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've experienced it from the women's side, which, as I said, encourages women to be calm, loving. I mean, there is this dissociation which he makes, is that your true self is only love. So whenever you enter the space of like anger, frustration, you are not your true self. And men are being taught that they should be really aggressive, that they should use their mind, their active mind, and that they should really, I've only heard what they've been told, and I don't know if this is absolutely true, but that they should basically sleep with as many women as possible, and that this would sort of encourage or fulfill their true nature as a man. So sentence, for example, like if you sleep with a woman for more than 5 times and you feel that you develop feelings for her, such as love, it is only your hormones telling you that this is the woman for you. And as an enlightened person, you are stronger than your hormones, so you shouldn't listen to that. And I mean, it's exactly the opposite of what women are being told. So I mean, it's basically just that creating a harem of women for men, which are being exploited and which believe that whenever they exit the space of being loving and caring, that they don't deserve being enlightened, that they're not their true selves. So yeah, I think it encourages the system of exploitation. And I think if you get men to believe that they need to listen to every, let's say, sexual impulse they have in their body, is very predatory, because you will encourage some sort of mechanism which can be very dangerous. So, and I think that all the men, again, which are participating in the process, many of them also do have health issues, do have trauma from their childhood. So I think many of them, they're not potentially bad people when they enter, but what is encouraged in them just becomes very bad. So, yeah.
We also live in a society that abides by a very certain set of laws around sex and violence and domestic abuse and stalking and relationships and all of these things. So when you go to somebody and you follow them so devoutly and you become so dependent on them because you've had all of your defenses so broken down, and then you're almost given permission to go out and act on all of these sexual impulses that you have, that's then obviously another layer of problematic things that are arising with this practice that's in place with the work that Sandesh is doing. And I know that you mentioned, and we should probably give a trigger warning now, which I'll also do at the start of the episode, that there may be some sensitive themes and subject matter that we go into on the back end of our interview today. But you mentioned that you basically said to Sandesh and Marella, like, this is not for me, I'm walking away. I've got other things that I need to be focusing on, and it doesn't really include my spiritual journey. But thank you so much for everything you've done for me so far. I've got this new process in my toolkit that I can use to manage my own mental health, and I thank you for that. But now is my time to move on. Is that where your journey ended? Did you end up involved with them again? What happened?
No, it is not where my journey ended, because I didn't participate in their work, but I was still in contact with Alina, because I did still have those mental health issues from PTSD. So I was still in contact with her, and occasionally also with Sandesh, because mostly the contact was made through Sandesh to Alina. And but I have been experiencing sexual assault during that time. And after I was seeking medical help from Alina in the Netherlands, because I was made to believe that she's working in the clinic, which Sandesh leads. I was raped on that occasion. And I mean, like, this experience, and I think that's interesting because I thought about that today a lot, which was like the worst experience for me, or which was really like made me walk away. And I think the worst, which I still suffer from today, is that I got pregnant through that experience, through that rape, and that Sandesh instructed a London-based gynecologist to abort that fetus. And I think like till today, like I'm really certain that if I like go inside and like, I'm like, okay, what is like the one point where you really like, and still like suffer from it? And as you said before, like something I think many people forget in all of that is like, people just think like, oh, once you're out, you're good. And I think many people don't realize something, like once you're out, the journey just begins. And this is something like I had experienced. I mean, like I was having therapy since I got out, sometimes like really long. I was just like for 1.5 years not doing anything because I was just mentally and physically exhausted. Like for weeks, I was just lying in my bed and I just needed to be alone and have nothing, like, and have all these like experiences like trespass my mind again and like order them, because I think this is something which I would love to have people like speak about more as well, about how they are healing and what they have done after that. Because I feel like there's so many reports online which tell you like, oh, I've experienced this and that, and which is good because you do find it relatable. But I just wish I had like more support also from like people just telling their journey, how they've actually made their way out and what they're still suffering from today. Because I feel like people are just ignoring that whole part. They're like, oh, she's out, she's, I don't know, back in her studies or having her friend circle, it's all good. And I think what we just said in the beginning before we started recording that podcast is that there's still like a big part of myself which I don't feel is relatable to the outside world. And like I feel like whatever experience you have which is distressing, in many cases it helps speaking to your friends or opening up to your family. And I feel like if you have spent a certain time in a cult or whatever they call themselves, the experiences which you have made within that group are so unrelatable to the outside world. Because of course, if you tell people that, the first question will be like, yeah, but why have you been staying with them? Like, why didn't you go away? And it's like, you don't want to open yourself up when you're in a vulnerable state to that questions all over again. And I feel like this is something which is sort of like missing in like the healing or support system afterwards, that on a daily basis you cannot open up to people. So I mean, like this podcast is like really healing. It's like a free like therapy session for me, but like it really like helps because you can just like openly speak about the things and you just won't throw like questions at me, which from a reasonable state of mind, you can, of course, now answer. But I mean, as you said, it's from an outsider looking in, without knowing all those mechanisms, those tools, the grooming and everything, which is very slowly and which is not very obvious. It is just not relatable. So thank you very much again for that. And yeah.
I think there's a lot in what you've just said that I think is important to go back over and look into. But even just then, by you saying, you know, when somebody says, why didn't you just walk away? that's such a difficult question to answer for so many different reasons, and the answer will be so different for every individual as well. We talk a lot about the sunk cost fallacy on this show. So some people may have given hundreds or thousands or everything that they own financially over to the person that they follow or the group that they follow. We talk a lot about the Mormon community and how somebody may own like a car repair business in the Mormon community. And then if they leave the church, they never get any more business because no Mormons will go to their car repair shop because they have renounced their faith. And that's completely different to somebody who doesn't want to answer that question because they put a lot of blame on themselves for what happened as well, which is always something that we try to talk about on this show as it may be necessary for somebody to feel that way about themselves, but it is not always true and correct. Just because somebody has fallen into one of these groups that has these very slow, meticulous systems in place to coerce and exploit its members, it doesn't mean that that is your fault. Those things that happened to you, it doesn't mean that those things are your fault. It's probably actually quite the opposite. You know, you're a decent human being that has very trusting and open instinct, and you want to connect and love with people and find meaning on a deeper level, and you want to overcome your own personal trauma. That doesn't make you a bad person. Just because those things were taken and used against you later on in ways that you didn't realize were being used against you, that is not your fault personally. So it's always very important to tell people as well that when somebody says to you, why didn't you walk away? They're not, you know, that you shouldn't think in your mind then. And I know it's very easy for me to say this, that it is for somebody to put it into practice. I completely respect and understand that. But when somebody says that to you, why didn't you just walk away? First of all, just assume that person is uneducated or ignorant, or maybe you just need to have an open discussion with them and they'll be like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Now I can go and research and understand myself. But on the flip side of that, it's not an accusation in your direction. Why didn't you just walk away? Oh, well, because and it's so hard not to get defensive when somebody asks that question. It can be applied to all sorts of things. When you're in a abusive relationship and somebody says, why didn't you just walk away? It's absolutely never, ever as simple as just saying, okay, I'm leaving. You know, there could be children involved. There could be money involved. There could be a very, very intrinsic set of emotional and behavioral manipulation tactics that have been placed on that other person in the relationship by the perpetrator in the relationship. So it's a very difficult one, and I think it's always important to make that point on the show that self-blame is maybe a natural reaction but not necessarily true. And what you mentioned before about the sexual assault under the guise of Sandesh's own doctor, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about that more. I don't understand how she could let that happen, first of all. I don't understand how Sandesh, well, maybe I do understand. He has like his own harem of women sleeping with him, and he has his own network of sexual gratification amongst all of these different women who believe it's their job to give themselves to this man and other men like him. And then also to kind of go through that very, very difficult process of from being pregnant to no longer being pregnant. And abortions are often things that aren't talked about very openly in public. They're a very taboo subject. And I feel like there's so much trauma that comes with those experiences that often women are just kind of expected to have those experiences and then just carry them with them for the rest of their lives and not talk about them in an open capacity with family or friends. You know, if you were to say to somebody, you know, I've had a really rough year, I was pregnant, but, I went to the doctor and I went through the abortion procedure. Like, somebody's probably just going to be like, whoa, that's a lot of information. I'm not sure if I'm in a place to have that conversation. And so there's a lot of, I feel like, trauma and maybe even PTSD that comes with those experiences that women are having all over the world as well. And there's no place to have an open discussion about that procedure and those experiences. Even in this age of birth control and supposed autonomy and all of those things that we talk about in terms of equal rights.
I think that's the key word, what you just used, the supposed autonomy, because I think that is absolutely often overlooked. What I just said with like the healing, like you can just apply that to an abortion as well, because people just pretend like, oh, she's out of the cult, like she's back on track, everything's good. And I think that's the same with an abortion, like the baby's gone and she's back on track and everything is good. And there is no support system and there is no, as you just mentioned, like relatable, open room where you can just speak about the feelings which basically haunt you after what either has happened to you or what you have done. And I think this is like, I'm neither pro or against abortion. I myself would have never chose an abortion because for me, and even more though, if I would have known what I would experience afterward. And I still say, like, to this day, looking back, the rape, the sexual assault, it was bad. But what still affects me the most is the abortion. And I think seeing all the terrible things which has happened to me during that time compared to the abortion, and I still pick the abortion as being worse. I mean, this is something which should really give people to think about, because I mean, there are so many women out there who go through that without having the cult-related background, and they're experiencing, I'm so sorry, and they're experiencing something worse than being in a cult. So I think there is this whole like pain and oh my God, you're making me cry as well.
Sorry, I'm just kind of listening. I'm just listening.
You can't have me speak about that and cry, okay?
Sorry. Go on.
No, but I think this is true because, I mean, if all the emotional pain I've been experiencing during the 6 months being with those people, and just this one incident still haunts me since the past. I mean, I've been out now for 3 years. And I mean, there's still like episodes, like weeks or months when I just feel like nothing matters because I've like lost the one precious thing. So it doesn't like matter if you're going to like, I don't know, be a doctor, have these studies, because you will just never get it back. And even though like, if you will get a new child, I mean, it will not be the child you've lost. It will be a new child. And I think like for me at that time, I don't want to get pregnant again because I feel like the pain would just be like too overwhelming. So I think that's like something, and I mean, that's like the most horrible thing which this group has done to me is that they first aborted the fetus and that they then forced me to have an abortion. So to have like choices made which affect my whole like since then. And I really felt that. And I think that's something which you mentioned with the PTSD is that I'm not the same person which I've been back then. But from me looking back, it's not because I have made those horrific experiences with the sexual assault. It's because I needed to become a different person because I couldn't deal with the abortion. And I mean, like, even now when I look at my friends who are my age and they like, I don't know, they go out, they go on dates, they want to have like a family, a boyfriend, they want to have children. And for me, this whole topic is like, so I don't know, it's like a red zone for me because anything like even if you just like touch your belly or something, there is always this memory. And I think this is like, it's a physical memory. You don't do that, or you don't go actively to that space. But I mean, that's something which women suffer beyond just being in a cult or anything like that. So, and I mean, there should be so much more like open space to like not normalize it, but maybe, as you just said, that women maybe choose more differently if they would really know the consequences. And I don't say that this applies to every woman, but I for myself can really say that I did not know the consequences. And you cannot know, if you haven't been through it, know actively the consequences. And I feel that's something which people never tell you. They always tell you, well, how do you going to care for that child? Yeah, but how are you going to care for yourself when that child is not there anymore?
Yeah. How are you going to finish university if you have a baby to care for?
Yeah, but that's not the question which they have. I mean, that's also a question. But on the same side, they should really like tell you and make you feel. And I feel like everyone in your family should be there and tell you like, listen, how are you going to feel if that baby, which you have already accepted as your baby, is not there anymore? And I feel like even like funerals, like I don't go to funerals anymore since then, because I just like, I don't find it fair that like that this person gets a funeral and like my child didn't. So that's something which I don't know, I just don't find is accepting for me anymore. And yeah, I'm so sorry I made you cry. Like you're gonna make me cry in a second as well.
I think there's just not enough discussion around it. I know that it's going to be kind of maybe strange for some of the male listeners to listen in, because or maybe even some of the other listeners who haven't experienced pregnancy, but it's a strange thing to kind of wake up in the morning and remember that you kind of have this life, and then kind of to go through that process of no longer being pregnant. It is like somebody has died, and you feel grief and you feel sadness, and you don't know where to place that, and there's nobody that comes to you and says, hey, do you want to speak to a grief counselor because you are grieving? Nobody comes to you and says like any of those things, and it's hard, and I've had friends that have been through these experiences, and I've not known kind of the best way to support them, and they've just told me that there is no way to support them, whether it's been through this procedure or through miscarriage. There's been no way to kind of help them through that. And just to see how heartbroken and devastated they are is obviously, you can tell from how I am now, it had quite a profound effect on me. So for you to go through that and not even make that decision yourself, even if it was an uninformed decision, to not be able to make that for yourself is a very difficult thing to think about. It's worrying to think about how many other vulnerable people may be going through similar experiences now, because they are involved with people like Sandesh. So hopefully through our discussion today, we can put this content out on the air, and it will be something that can stay on the air and not be scrubbed and not be taken down, and remain something that people can listen to and access openly, and understand some of the consequences that come from some of these really dangerous wellness groups that are posing to be beneficial for you, but actually have very exploitative undertones. So yeah, sorry.
No, don't worry. I can absolutely feel you. I just feel like if I'm gonna start crying now, so I will not be able to like finish my podcast. But the thing is, I mean, even that we're speaking about that now, I feel like many women feel exactly like we do. And I feel like just speaking about that would cause them so much pain that they just choose not to. And I absolutely understand. I mean, like since the past couple of years, I'm just like fueling myself with work. And I remember like every evening coming home and just like feeling exactly the pain which you feel now. And it just gets you so frustrated because you realize you will just never escape that, because there is nothing ever which can be done to make that go away, because it's final, it's terminate basically. And I feel like for me, it's like, I mean, I'm also asking myself sometimes, like, why am I still like doing all this work? I mean, I could just also be like, okay, I'm out, I've learned my lesson, there's already content online. But I feel like for me, it's just sort of like regaining my power and just also like channeling that pain into, I don't know, anger with what I can feel better. So I think for me, and I've also asked myself, because my mom always tells me if I haven't had enough by now and if I just stop and like start life. But for me, this is like, start a life. Well, this is my life. Like, do you think like just tomorrow I'm just gonna wake up and just be like, okay, this is all in the past and I'm just gonna start all over? So for me, I feel if I would just stop speaking about it or stop, I don't know, doing something else about it, that I would just be getting ill again, because all those thoughts and all what I've experienced and all the pain would just be even more introvert into me. So I feel like this is like the only way to deal with it, because even like tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be like, okay, the things which have happened to me, they are bad, and other people feel the pain as well, which I've gone through. And it just gives you some sort of like integration of that trauma into your life, it's there, it's painful, but it's some sort of like, okay. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think it's hard. I want to sit here and say, I'm really, really so sorry that all of those things have happened to you. But I don't feel like it's the correct response to have. And I don't mean that in like a I'm not sorry for you kind of way. I mean that in like a, me saying that I'm sorry for those things that happened to you can never equate to how deeply I actually I can't actually articulate my thoughts into a response to your story. And anything I say is going to sound insensitive, because there isn't anything that can quantify what you've been through and what you've experienced. But who knows how many other people might listen to this episode, or any other things that you decide to do in your activism and your whistleblowing, because you're angry, because you don't want to sit still, because you don't just want to wake up tomorrow and say, well, these things happened and that's too bad, and I'm just going to try and get on with things. Like, why should you do that? Why should you just sit down and say, oh, well, that's too bad. I'm just going to cut my losses and just carry on as if it never happened. Like, nobody should have to do that. And by doing this, people may have had similar experiences and can kind of grow with you into a more positive space. Or people may come across Osho, or come across Sandesh, or come across something in a couple of years and think, do you know what, I've heard something about this, and then decide that actually they no longer want to pursue this wellness group that is posing to have their best interests at heart. And that sounds like a long stretch, but I had somebody get in touch with me the other day and say that they were going to join Body and Brain, which is like a yoga meditation group, which I've covered on the show. And then they listened to the episode that we released, and they decided that actually the red flags that they had thought they noticed in the first few sessions were legitimate. And they'd got their friends and family involved at that point, and they had said that they had to go and do some damage control in order to stop their friends and family from becoming fully involved in the group. So that's one example of what can happen from just people sitting down and having these conversations and having them on record, and then, putting them out into the ether where people can access them and listen to them. And it's difficult if you have kind of your mum saying, why can't you just get over it? Because it's another one of those statements that's like, why didn't you just walk away? It's such a difficult statement to answer. You can't just say to her, because of XYZ. It's not as easy as that. I don't know if maybe listening to this episode might make her realize that it's not as easy as just kind of,
I think it's what she realizes as well. But I think that's another thing, which I think there are two components. One of them is people around you, they move on with their lives. And I feel like if you have had a really traumatic experience, 4 or 5 years are nothing. And I feel like time, just everyone has their own time to what they need to complete something. And I feel like 4 to 5 years seem quite a lot of time. It's like, okay, yeah, someone, like, there has been the time already. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing is what I've just mentioned with like the monitoring and like the stalking and everything.
Yes.
She sees that, and she sees that I'm also suffering from that, and that this stresses me, and again takes a lot of my lifetime where I'm focusing on like, how do I make this safe or that. And I feel she just thinks that I should invest my time in something which is actually beneficial to me. But in a very paradox way, I mean, I do this because I enjoy doing it on a certain level. So, I mean, it is still beneficial. And I think that's something which people need to understand when they also feel like they should protect me from doing something or going against that group. But I need that. And I'm doing this because I'm some sort of enjoying it. Like, it is just the path which I need to do right now. So, yeah. And I think people just say that because they have their own bubble in which they're living, and they wouldn't want to expose themselves to this certain distress which those things bring with them. So, but I don't experience it as distress. Yeah.
I think you've summed it up really well there. And as you said, you enjoy doing some of this because it's given you back some of that control that you had taken away from you for such a long time. And why wouldn't you feel good about that? I think everybody feels good when they're in control of themselves. A lot of the time, that's why friendships and relationships and workplaces suffer, because everybody's trying to micromanage everything. Because if you've got control over absolutely everything, then you kind of feel like, okay, I know what's going on with everything, so there's no reason for me to be kind of stressed. And then it starts snowing when it's supposed to be sunny, and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't control the weather, what am I going to do? But it's perfectly natural for you to want to take control back. And I'm all here for it, and I praise you for it. And I think it's commendable. I think it's strong. I think that it's showing other people who may have been through similar experiences that even if you're not sure if you should be or why you are speaking out, then just do it, because it makes you feel good. And if you are surrounded by people that don't understand why you're doing it, that's also okay, and time is subjective to each person. We've talked about grief and grieving, and a friend of mine, she had somebody, a close family member, pass away, and her family were showing photos of the deceased family member, and my friend said, I don't want to look at those photos, and her family were all kind of a bit strange with her, like, why not? We're celebrating this person's life. And she said, I'm just not ready to look at those pictures yet. They're upsetting me. They're really upsetting me. And the family were kind of really strange and distant with her after that. And I just said to her, don't let anybody try to define to you the stages of grief. There's no set time on any of those things. If you're not ready to look at those pictures, don't look at them. Yeah. And there may come a time where you want to sit down on your own and take a look at those pictures, and that's absolutely fine. Or there may be a time where you pull out the pictures with your family and you instigate the conversation, where you look back on family memories and happy times and this person's, life in pictures. But, there's nothing, there's no textbook, there's nothing that says like, it takes exactly this amount of time before you're ready to take part in, family activities that celebrate a person's life. If you're in a state of grieving, you take it at every step at a time that feels comfortable to you. And it's exactly the same with this process. If you're not ready to talk to somebody, don't talk to somebody, you know. If you feel like you want to talk to somebody but you're not sure where you would start, write some things down. Try and kind of come up with a chronology and a timeline of when and how things happened and how that made you think and feel. Maybe not in the way that the process encouraged you to do your work necessarily. Even though you've said that's a very beneficial tool, it was done in a very specific way. And I'm sure there are other methods that people could follow that are similar to those ones that wouldn't come with Sandesh attached to them. So, you know, there are processes, and people say that keeping a journal is really beneficial, or finding a professional to speak to in terms of therapy is really beneficial, or going onto a place, like I always say, going onto a place like Reddit and finding a forum that's specific to you where you can go on and speak to people, or even just lurk and read other people's experiences and how they think and feel. There's subreddits for even things like parental narcissistic parents or something like that. So if that's something that you feel like you suffer with, you can go on there and read people's stories and be like, oh my goodness, yes, I knew my mom was a narcissist and everyone's confirmed it here for me. And they'll have like a whole list of resources that you can go and access. So it's and I think this has kind of been the theme for our episode. It's hard to pinpoint the stages between when something good turns bad and when talking about something bad is good for you. It's hard to kind of navigate your way through all of those different things. And people often say that when they came out of movements, they had it was like their brain was like a bowl of spaghetti in front of them, and they had to kind of try and lay out every piece of pasta so that everything was disentangled. And that's the difficult process that we talk about on this show. And, I
remember I was doing exactly that as well. I remember when I was just getting out, like before I approached my lawyer or anything, I just made a whole folder with like all the emails, everything collected. And I remember her asking me like the first meeting, so like, do you feel better now? And I was like, yes, I actually do. So it's like, those like even little things. I mean, I spent like half a day just like printing everything out, but you need that in the very beginning to just even have like an overview. And I feel like what you said, I mean, with taking back control, I feel like in my story, because I've actually gone to the Metropolitan Police, I have made a claim against that. And the Metropolitan Police has strongly mishandled my case over 3 years. I had to chase them over 3 years for updates. They have not followed any avenues of any material there is, where I'm certain there is, which they haven't done. And I mean, this was all before the story of Sarah Everard and the misogynist culture hit the British papers. So when I was going to the police, I still had this also very naive, but very like, oh, good people image. They're going to help me. They will protect me and so on. And again, this does not happen. So I was like let down a second time. And I mean, especially the doctor who forced the abortion is still practicing in Marylebone. His name is Dr. Eskander. And I mean, that experience again has sort of also, of course, forced me to like go out and speak about what has happened to me. And I mean, if they would have just done their job properly, and if they would have just done everything what would be in their power and executed all of that, I'm sure we would be in a different state right now. And I'm sure there would be at least a trial. And I think if you also look at the numbers of in Britain of the rape cases, which are reported, and I mean, there is a very low number of women who even go to the police and report their case because it is very distressing for some of them. And 98% of those cases are just being declined right at the police. They don't even go to the CPS because there is a certain threshold. So 3% of all those cases go to the CPS, on only 1.5% end in a prosecution.
Goodness.
So, and I mean, if you look at the statistics, I think England has the highest number of rapes. I think they're like, it's after that comes Sweden, and at the very end comes Germany and Switzerland. So, I mean, with the case of Sarah Everard, that something like this didn't happen earlier is sort of surprising. I mean, that it happened is very shocking, and I'm extremely sorry for her and her family. But still, that this could have the whole system within the Metropolitan Police has to be, it is so against what they say, what they are for, that they are protecting women, that they are there for them. I mean, during the whole time, I have not had any support from them. So I've just made my interview, and basically I've chased them for 3 years for a decision. And after 3 years, they've told me that for one of the claims, they're not even responsible, because another country, the Netherlands, would be. So it has taken them 3 years. And then, of course, if you go to the Dutch police, which I have done, they're again asking you, yeah, but why are you coming now when there is no CCTV and nothing left? Why haven't you come 3 years ago? And you're like, yeah, but I've been to the Metropolitan Police and they've just informed me now that they're not responsible for that. So I think all of these like small mechanisms, if you have to go through that, and I mean, I was very young at that stage, and I feel like still it has been beneficial to me. And I think that's why I'm also continuing, because if I now look back and I just think, oh, what if you haven't done all of that? That's what I said with the distress. I think I would just be even more distressed, because I would feel like I would have needed to just like quietly and like silently dissociate myself from all of that, which has happened to me. So like that, like every time I'm speaking to someone, or I'm even like angry with someone or frustrated, still, I feel like it has a place in my life. So, I mean, it could have, like many things could have been done better, and I would have wished for a different outcome, but still it's sort of like helped me through that. Yeah.
And I wonder if a lot of groups and people like Sandesh and his following kind of rely on the fact that you have to jump through so many loopholes when it comes to law enforcement with a lot of these subjects as well, because they kind of think like, you know, first of all, maybe law enforcement won't even pursue this. Second of all, maybe Sarah will get frustrated with law enforcement and give up trying to get law enforcement to pursue this.
Yeah.
And even then, like, even if law enforcement did pursue it, would anything stick? If it did, they could always just rebrand, because like you've said, Sandesh and his group are so good at making sure that then they're not known to be affiliated with Osho International. So it's like a minefield in itself, even if people come forward to talk about their experiences and to try and get some legal justice on what has been done. It's difficult, which isn't me saying that people should be discouraged. I think it's extremely important that people tell their stories and that people put things down on record. And the Nexium case is just one example of what can happen when strong women come together to tell their stories on the stand and get justice for somebody that has done such awful things to so many people. And that particular person will now spend, you know, the rest of his life in prison. He will never step foot outside of prison as a free man ever again. So that is just one example of what can happen when people rally together to make change. You know, I spoke to another lady the other day, Rachel, who went to the Elan school. Their school got shut down because the former students came together and disclosed all of their allegations of abuse and things that had happened to them while they attended that therapeutic boarding school. That's another example of what can happen when people rally together and tell their stories. So just because these loopholes exist and this is a minefield that you're stepping into when you decide to speak out about your story in terms of getting legal justice and not just whistleblowing like on a platform like this one, it may sound discouraging when we talk about it in the way that you've come forward and talked about it with your experience in the ineptitude of the Metropolitan Police when you've gone to them with all of this information and you've had to chase them, and just for them to tell you 3 years later that you're talking to the wrong police department in the wrong country, that's not good enough. And that is your particular story, but that shouldn't be something that dissuades others from coming forward to tell their story. And are you mentioned that you've got a lawyer that you speak to. Are you still in some type of legal battle? Are you still hoping to bring some charges against the group? And where does that stand right now?
Well, I think, yeah, I am still involved in that, as I said, in the other country. And I think my hope is still that people will just come forward, because there are many voices in the 70s and 80s raising awareness or telling their stories of what they have been experiencing within that group. But there are not many people who tell their stories with their experience with the group right now. So that's sort of my hope, that other people will tell their stories or come forward, and that through that maybe the Metropolitan Police would reopen the case. But this is, I know, very far away, but still, you never know, maybe in 5 or 10 years there will be other people, and I might just be a small voice. And for me, this will hopefully by then not make much of a difference to me anymore. But still, it's sort of as you just said, it shouldn't sound like my story, shouldn't sound discouraging. But I think if you are to pursue the way, I hope by now the Metropolitan Police, it is sort of exposed what culture they have within. So they have to adapt to that, and they have to change their inner workings. And hopefully in the future they will handle those cases with more care. So yeah, it shouldn't sound discouraging, but still I think you have to have a very high frustration threshold. And I think it's also, and what my perception was always of the police is that you go there and they're going to protect you actively, they're going to do something. And I think that's just not how things work. That's sort of the ideal thing. But you're just going to be one of 1,000 cases, and each day there will be new cases. So to basically keep the interest in your case, it's sort of like selling your case to them. You have to show that you still want to have this pursued. And I think that's maybe why many women feel that they're being let down, because they're not as, penetrant as I am, or they're not. You have to be quite aggressive and always remind them again that your case is still important, that you want to see justice. So I think that's just something which you have to do and be ready to do when you're pursuing this. And I think there is another thing. I think that's the danger with cults, and especially this cult, is, there was the Metropolitan Police on one side, and on the other hand, there were people appearing, wanting to threaten me and all of that. So I think that's also something which maybe isn't the right thing for everyone, because you have to be ready to also be alone for a long time. When I left the group, I moved to Madrid. I was completely alone for 6 months because I didn't want to have, I broke the contact to all my friends, which I've also known for a couple of years there, to just not have any access point for them where they could sort of find me.
Yeah.
So that's another thing which is beyond the sexual assault and everything. But I think if you want to pursue that in that manner, you have to be ready to be isolated and be good with that for a very long time. And also to be good with moving, changing places, maybe changing universities and all of that. So it does affect your life. And I remember I was complaining to my mother a couple of years ago that I have not made an active decision since, 4 years. And active decision, by that, I mean a decision which I freely made out of just wanting to do something without taking all the other factors which are in my life into account, and then basing the decision on that. So I think that's something if you want to do that and go forward against the cult, there is a lot which comes with that, especially if you go against an organization. I don't want to call them cult because for me they're more like a mafia, but against an organization which is so powerful and which is so connected and which involves so many people who are not visibly connected to them. So it is very, very difficult. And I think like what I've just been doing the past years is that I've been really, really selected with my friends, with my inner circle. I have really few people who I trust, who I let into my apartment. And I try to make contact with people who I've known from school, who I've known for a very long time, where I know where they come from, where I know the parents, where I know that they've just never been in any sort involved in that. And that sort of like gives me security. Because if you want to meet new people, and that's what I mean by active decisions. I mean, it's just, if you want to meet new people, you filter every word automatically of what they're saying, if there could be a connection, if they want to infiltrate your life, if you can leave your phone around them, like all these thoughts. And it has a big effect on your life. And I think that's what my mother also sees. And that's why she's just asking me to find like a point where it's just going to come to a conclusion. But I feel like I'm not there, like I said before. So, yeah.
Some of the stuff we've kind of missed, and I know there's so much more to this in the information that you sent over to me before we talked today. I know there's so much that we haven't talked about. You briefly mentioned that the program that you used to do the process work initially meant that your laptop was then tracking all of the websites that you would visit and your information and store and all of your data. And I think you mentioned that your phone was also being tracked at one point as well. And then your mum was being followed by somebody that was involved in the group, and you were being followed, and so kind of there was the stalking and gang stalking as well. You know, I've done an episode on my conspiracy podcast where I talked about the phenomenon of gang stalking. And this is definitely something that happened with you, when it's not one person following one person. It's a group of people following one person and other people related to that person. So you're a targeted individual, which is basically what gang stalking all comes down to. And why was that? I mean, I can kind of see why your laptop and your phone would be tracked, so they could see where you were going, what you were doing when you were involved in the group. But once you moved away from the group, the gang stalking, what do you think was the purpose behind that? Was it to scare you into coming back, or to make sure that you weren't talking to police?
I think at first, because going to the police was not on the first point on my agenda. My first point was really to get away, to like cap every access point they had, to like regain my privacy from them. And I remember I moved to Madrid and I just entered language school there to get some contacts. And I just told everyone there that I was a medicine student from Vienna, and I never mentioned London or anything. So after 2 weeks, suddenly a woman appeared, and she just joined the course with me for a couple of days. And on her last day, she approached me and she was like, "So Sarah, when are you coming back to London to finish your design studies?"
Oh my goodness.
I mean, like, this is still a scene which I like from now, like I was much younger than I am now. And like, when I look back, I was like alone in a country in Madrid. I didn't speak the language. And I mean, Madrid is quite big. And so like, but I didn't really get scared. I got like so angry that they would like have decency to like even follow me here. And when you ask them the question, like, why are they doing this? So I think there are like several steps. And like the beginning, certainly, I think it was to get me back and to show me that I cannot just run away from them or get away from them. But there was also this aspect where I think Sandesh really underestimated me. And I think he thought that I was much more dependent on him. And he sort of like, this was not even like threatening me. It was more of, I don't know, offering me the hand back. And I mean, it evolved because like after a couple of months, then even before I went to the police, they just got much more aggressive, where they even like placed hotel cards in my hotel room, where there were like so many things. And I think it just became sort of a power thing, because the more he realized that I really just went away, like I just described before, with this narcissistic, sadistic personality, it's sort of like a power game as well, where he just feels like, what has suddenly gone wrong? Like, why is this function not working the way I wanted to and the way I was sure it was? So, and when I went to the police, I mean, then it was just threatening me that I shouldn't do anything more. I think it was mainly threats. But like now, even though they're still like infiltrating my phones or my laptops or something, I think for the moment it's mainly about gaining information. And I think what I've been really conscious about is also that I don't want them. I mean, even now, like, I don't think that they knew for a very long time how my thought process was. So I think like maybe they're going to listen to that. And I think this is like the first time that they really understand how I think right now. And I mean, this was something which I always thought was like a weak spot, that if I would get to know someone more closely, they would again know which are my vulnerabilities, what I suffer from right now, so they could access this again. And I mean, like now I feel like more comfortable and more strong that I could spot those people as well. But back then I just felt like I cannot even open up to anyone, to not expose any vulnerability, to not give them access, not only to my laptop, but even like to my own mind. So yeah, but I feel it's mainly, I mean, my story again, it's very personal, related to Sandesh and what he just wishes to do or not to do. So I mean, it's a power game for him.
I imagine it's hard to have connections with any people that you don't know, in fear that, you know, you may end up bonding with that person for them to then turn around and say, you know, when are you going to come back to London? And the prospect of new friendships and relationships in the face of Sandesh always kind of being around and having that influence is kind of terrifying. So even still going to police and coming to talk to me and, you know, thinking about other ways that you can get the message out and the word out, I think is so highly brave of you to do that, even in the face of all of these people trying to maybe not scare you into not talking, but to monitor your actions. Even that is particularly scary.
But I think I also made really good friends, because imagine if you meet like a new person who has like 3 or 4 phones and changes her number every 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, you must really like that person to stick around, no? And like the people like who I've met and who I've just like, I don't know how I would have reacted.
Yeah. And that's so funny as well, because now my initial introduction to you makes so much more sense, because when the person that initially emailed me saying I've got somebody who'd like to talk to you, I was like, okay, this is a bit strange. There's like a middleman here, and I kind of don't understand why. And they were like, yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about you, yourself, your process, before we kind of agreed to whether we'd like to chat or not. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, this is how I do things. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And now here you are. And you are not the person that initially emailed me, or maybe you are. Maybe we'll never know. I can see why you would need to do that, and can appreciate that wholeheartedly from what you've told us today. You know, it sounds like you can't take any step too over precautious. When you went to another country where you didn't know anybody, and you were still followed over there and approached by somebody that knew who you were and where you'd come from. So just sort of in our last couple of minutes of the interview today, I know we've glossed over so much. We haven't talked about half of the things that I had on my list because we focused more on some themes than others in our conversation. But one of the last questions that I wanted to ask before we end today is, what advice would you have for anybody else that has been in their own high demand control group, and what would be your biggest sort of takeaway from our chat today?
Well, I think, first of all, I took a lot from that chat personally. I think because I felt like really bonded on the abortion topic. So I feel like it's just really reassuring for me that I'm not alone in that. And it's just reassuring, this might sound mean, but that another person feels that pain also. And it's just something which will, I don't know, it's okay if it sticks with you. And I think that's something which I never allow myself, that it's okay that this pain might stay, or it might increase, or it's just there for maybe just, I don't know, 10 minutes, but that's still okay. And on the other hand, I think that listening to my story, I mean, when I tell like everything from like, because now we have touched on so many topics, and usually if I speak to people, it's like I just focus on one topic, or I just explain like how the process works or something. It just might sound like harder than it is. I mean, it does sound very confusing, and it does sound, but I feel like when you are in the situation, it's like your survival mechanism takes over. And I don't feel like, as I said, besides the abortion, like anything of that has affected me that much. And as I said, like, I feel like maybe people who are listening to that, they might be like, oh my God, this sounds like such a long journey. And like, it sounds like so hard to get out, but it's actually not. I think once you've just made your decision, it's easier than you think, because I mean, like, the chances that you actually meet some of those people are so small, because still like the world is so much bigger. And I think that's something which has to be there every day, that even though, yes, it is a big group and it is a big network, but still like there are so many people out there. And if you just like go to the streets, the reality is that whatever person you will approach and speak to will have nothing to do with them. And I think that's something to like not lose yourself in that paranoia of like, oh my God, I've been with those people for so long, or they're affecting my life. Like, no, like this is something which, well, first of all, I still choose for them to be affecting my life. But still, so there's so many other realities out there. And I feel like that's something to be aware of. And also when you're in that circle, to like be like, if you feel like I cannot go out, well, just, I don't know, sign up for like a knitting course, like you said, and just like start speaking to people, because they will have a different reality and they will just drag you out automatically. And that's also something which I did when I was like in that sort of like healing phase of like a year. I was offered like to go to a clinic, but I refused because I wanted I chose to go to a hotel in like the mountains with like a lot of green around and everything. And I did have psychological help, but looking back, I think which also healed me was like the nature. And I was surrounded by really normal people, like families. And I think that's something which like really helped me, because like my own story was not reflected to the outside, and like you sort of adapt to what you surround yourself with. And in my case, if I look back and if I would have maybe like gone to a clinic or something, and I would have been surrounded with all these like other, let's say, desperate stories or sad stories, I don't feel myself like recovering that good from it anymore. And even when I was in Madrid, and I remember I was going to the bus station and I didn't have any money with me, any coins. And I remember the guy behind me just paid for the bus, like a stranger. And I was just like, this is such like key moment for me. I was like, oh my God, there's still like decent and good people. And that's something like in Madrid, like I've met like so many like normal, nice people, just decent people. And I feel like if you like want to get out of something like that, you don't have to like go like far, or like just really sign up for a course, do something what you enjoy, because automatically they will just lose power over you. So yeah, I hope it didn't sound like too discouraging.
No, I think I really love these parts of the episodes when I ask people what their advice would be, because everybody's advice, like some of it sounds similar, some of it sounds like very new, but there's always kind of like the key themes of you know, independence and the outside world is not as bad as the people on the inside of the group that you've been in will have you think that the outside world is. And what you've said there about the stranger on the bus kind of paying for your ticket, it's unconditional. He's not saying, you know, I'll pay for your ticket if you do this for me. He's kind of just like, here's your ticket money, and that's it. You know, you go where you're going, he goes where he's going. You probably never cross paths again, and that's okay. So it's not discouraging. I think what you've said there about, you know, to talk if you're ready, but don't if you don't, and understand that not every single person in the world is going to be attached to the group that you've been a part of. Surround yourself by normal. I use the word typical. You know, people might be like, why does she always say the word typical? Why reintegrate into typical everyday life? What does that mean? Normal. I don't know if there is a way to determine what normal is. So by using the word typical, I think like my typical everyday life is typical to me. It might be not be different. It might be different for you, but your typical everyday life is typical for you. So that's kind of why I use that word. And I think the word normal is kind of, it sometimes doesn't always fit into that. So, you know, surround yourself by typical families, you know, surround yourself with typical couples and hotel spaces and situations and scenarios where you can look over and say, that's familiar to me, because I've seen that before when I've gone to eat in a restaurant where the toddler has the fork and they're banging it on the table, and you're kind of like, that's typical to me. And that makes me feel reassured in the environment that I'm in, that I've decided to come to as part of my recovery process. So move in those spaces. If you can find something that feels familiar and safe, you know, go into those places and into those and into those areas. But be careful as well with that, because there is the phenomenon of cult hopping. So somebody said to me the other day, I went from one of these therapeutic boarding schools into the armed forces because it felt familiar. So, you know, that's not what I mean. That's not the type of familiarity that I'm trying to encourage on this show specifically right now. Just drawing on what you said about, you know, instead of checking yourself into a clinic for professional help, you went to a hotel up in the mountains with beautiful green, luscious environments, surrounded by typical people that you might see in your everyday life, like families and couples and things like that. And I think that is a nice piece of advice to give to people who may have tried a couple of things and things haven't worked, or who are thinking about what they can do in terms of starting their own recovery journey and not knowing where to begin. And, you know, you talked about people having benefits from keeping writing journals and stuff. You talked about printing things off, emails and paper trails, and getting all of that stuff in order. If being in one of these, like your hotel environment, if somebody could find the equivalent of that and be able to do the work that you've done, the equivalent of what you've done in terms of ordering things, maybe there's a good place to start then, and a good place to begin in terms of that recovery journey. And there's so much that we haven't spoken about, and we could probably do like 3 or 4 episodes just on the stuff that you sent over that we haven't even talked about.
And I think something else, because I've just noticed this the last couple of days, it's, even though if you're on a good path and you're like, oh my God, these people will never infiltrate my life anymore, even if like someday someone does, and this was what was happening always on my birthday, that like someone would show up and like remind me of the abortion. It's like, looking back, it's like, I should have just like made it, I mean, this sounds very horrible now, but I should have just like turned it into a comedy, because I got so affected by it, and I got thrown back so many like years back into that situation. And if you look at it, I mean, there is a guy who pays another guy, or I don't know, to come there to speak to me and all of that. I mean, it's so weird. No, it's like I should have just like dragged myself out of that situation more and just like try to look at it from sort of like a comic perspective. And even now, if they like infiltrate my laptop, it's like, do so, you know, like I'm just gonna get a new one. I'm gonna do all the measurements. And if you feel like you have to do that all over again, well, do so. And I feel like with all these actions, which you have to done for necessary privacy, but what has affected me so much was the distress which I connected to it, you know? So it's like, I was like, oh no, why are they doing this again? It's like, well, let them do it. It's like, they're not going to affect it. They're not going to do this forever. And even if they wish to, it's fine as well. So I feel that's something, if you are on a good path and there's like, they throw a rock at you, it doesn't mean that you have to fall over like I did many times. It's just like, you can just look at it and just step over. It doesn't affect you anymore. And even though I already had a very good life and like, I was out of it again, like these rocks, which they threw at me, I stumbled over them and I thought like, oh my God, no, I'm back where I was like 2 years ago. And this is not the case. So even though they something hits you, don't let it like distract you from where you are right now already. Yeah,
that's a great way. That analogy of the rocks is a really good way of looking at it. And the comedy part as well has got me thinking in my mind that the time that your mind kind of drifts back towards Sandesh and his followers makes me wonder if he is equally spending as much time thinking about you as the kind of experiment, because you're the one on the outside that they brought in and it didn't work.
I hope he is. I really hope he is, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair to me.
You know, it didn't work because, you know, you didn't stay and it wasn't for you, and you basically told them to go F themselves, and then all of these things happen, and now he's like, oh yes, it's coming up to her birthday again. You must send somebody. I want you to send him over there, and I want you to tell him to do all of these things. So it's almost like your mind through the trauma may drift back to certain key events that happened during your time with Sandesh and Osho International. But at the same time, he is obviously focusing on you as kind of almost like air quotes, the one that got away.
Yes, yeah.
The one that wouldn't conform to the role that he wanted you to fulfill, or function in, air quotes again. And so he's kind of making a point to make sure that you don't forget his impact on your life, but you've obviously in turn impacted him in a way, and his ego and his narcissism, because he can't seem to just let you get on with things. And if you're not going to do what your mum says, which is just kind of like, why can't you just kind of get on with it and have a life? If he's going to keep reminding you of these things, then it surely, you know, you wanting to talk about it and open up about it is even more Sandesh's fault, because he's not letting you forget everything that happened. Yes. He's not letting you just let go of everything. He's constantly reminding you of his involvement and things that happened under his watch. And it's kind of just like strange, you know, they're kind of like, don't you talk about us, but also don't you forget. It's like, what does he really want?
It's exactly like you're saying, because when I left the process, I was asking back my money, everything my mother had paid. So I was confronting him and I wanted to give me back all the money. And he declined. He was inventing a story that he's very ill in hospital in Romania, which wasn't true. And then he set up an NDA where he said basically that I cannot speak about the process or any organization linked to it, any person. So he basically exposed, first of all, that he knew me. Second of all, that there is a vast network and that I know about that.
And second of all, there are things that he does not want discussed on a public forum.
So, I mean, and with that NDA, I mean, I was able to prove that there was a connection between us and that there is a network and that I know things which he doesn't want me to expose. So, I mean, would have he just paid me back the money which I've spent, I would have had no proof of anything.
it's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? What we've discussed on today's episode in terms of Sandesh and his violence towards some group members and some of the things that we've missed off. And I feel like I say this every episode, but maybe we'll have to do like a second part. I feel like because so many roads have led back to Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh this episode as well, and over this week, that maybe I'll have to have kind of like a round table discussion between all of the people that have been impacted by this one man that lived and had the ashram in Pune and in Oregon as well. But we'll have to see what happens. So all that's left now, apart from all the stuff that we haven't discussed, is for me to just say thank you so much for coming here and speaking to me. I feel like you coming here today and having this discussion in my Zoom chat is more prevalent than usual because of the steps that you have had to take to maintain your privacy and your anonymity around this subject and around protecting yourself from people that are stalking you online and in person. So I do really appreciate you coming here and trusting me today, and for giving us your story and your time, for deciding to come forward and speak on a public forum about Sandesh and Osho International and some of the whitewashed programs that are posing themselves as wellness groups but are actually just preying on young and vulnerable and people in periods of transition or grief and all of these things, and for just highlighting the fact that there is so much behavior and information, thought and emotional control that is going on in these types of wellness and therapy groups that needs to be highlighted. And from start to finish, there's been so many different examples of this, even from the dress all the way through to, you know, the doctor who doesn't live where she says she lives, and all of these things that have come through with the information control and behavior control. So thank you so much, Sarah, for coming here today, for being vulnerable with us and opening up to us, and for giving us your story, and for hopefully arming others with the correct tools to notice those red flags when they come up and to act on them. And if those red flags have already turned into situations of abuse or coercion or manipulation, to then take some of your courage and to take some of your bravery into those steps of recovery that you've spoken us through today. So I just appreciate it, and it's just been great to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Casey, and thank you very much for giving this platform. I think it really encourages people to speak about it, and thank you very much for being that open and understanding. Thank you.
I'll speak to you soon, Sarah. Take care. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
That is the end of this week's episode. To get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.